The alley reeked of rust and despair, a jagged scar cutting through San Francisco's underbelly where the city's pulse thrummed with danger. Elliot Kane, 28, sprinted through the shadows, his heart hammering as gunfire cracked behind him. He wasn't supposed to be here. Not tonight, not ever. But the scream he'd heard from the warehouse had pulled him in like a moth to flame. He'd always been reckless, or so his sister Mia said, her voice echoing in his mind as he ducked behind a dumpster. You can't save everyone, Elle. But Elliot couldn't walk away. Not when he heard that scream, raw and desperate, like someone was fighting for their last breath. He was a bartender, not a hero. But something in him snapped when he saw the man pinned against the wall, blood dripping from his temple, surrounded by 3 thugs in tailored suits. The tallest one, with a scar slicing through his eyebrow, held a gun to the man's chest, his voice low and venomous. You think you can cross Lorenzo and walk away, Julian? Julian. That was the name of the man whose eyes locked onto Elliot's in that split second, wide with fear but burning with defiance. He was in his early 30s, lean but strong, with sharp cheekbones and a tailored coat now torn at the sleeve. Even battered, he carried an air of someone who didn't belong in this grimy corner of the world. Elliot didn't think, he acted. Grabbing a lead pipe from the ground, he lunged, swinging hard. The pipe connected with the gunman's wrist, sending the weapon skittering across the pavement. Chaos erupted. Fists flew, curses rang out, and Elliot's pulse roared as he tackled one of the thugs, his knuckles splitting against bone. Julian fought back too, surprisingly agile, landing a precise kick to another thug's knee. Within moments, the 3 men scattered, retreating into the night with threats of retribution. You're dead, both of you, Scarface spat before vanishing. Elliot didn't care. His chest heaved as he turned to Julian, who was slumped against the wall, clutching his side. You okay? Elliot asked, voice rough, his hands still trembling from adrenaline. Julian's hazel eyes studied him, wary but grateful. You shouldn't have done that, he said, his voice low, almost melodic despite the pain. But thank you. He extended a hand. Julian Hart. Elliot took it, his calloused fingers brushing against Julian's smooth ones. Elliot Kane. You owe me a drink for this. He tried to grin, but the weight of what he'd just done settled in. He crossed a line, stepped into a world he didn't understand. Lorenzo. The name hung in the air like a storm cloud. Everyone in the city knew Lorenzo DeLuca, the Mafia boss who owned half the docks and didn't forgive debts or defiance. They stumbled out of the alley together, Julian leaning on Elliot as they made their way to Elliot's beat-up apartment above the bar where he worked. The place was a mess. Empty beer cans, a sagging couch, and a guitar he hadn't touched in months. But it was safe. Julian collapsed onto the couch, wincing as Elliot handed him a damp towel to clean the blood from his face. What did you do to piss off Lorenzo? Elliot asked, trying to keep his tone light, though his gut churned with unease. Julian hesitated, his gaze flickering to the window. It's complicated, he said finally. I was looking into something, got too close. His vagueness was deliberate, and Elliot caught it but didn't push. Not yet. Instead, he poured them both a shot of whiskey from a bottle on the counter. To surviving, he said, raising his glass. Julian's lips twitched into a faint smile, and they clinked glasses, the tension between them softening for a moment. Over the next few days, Julian became a fixture in Elliot's life. He showed up at the bar, the Rusty Anchor, where Elliot slung drinks for dockworkers and dreamers. Julian was different, polished, articulate, with a dry humor that caught Elliot off guard. They talked late into the night, sharing stories over cheap bourbon. Julian spoke of growing up in Chicago, of a father who taught him to fight and a mother who taught him to dream. Elliot opened up about his own past, losing his parents young, raising Mia through foster homes, and the quiet ache of never quite fitting in. He didn't mention the part about being gay, the part he kept buried under sarcasm and solitude. But the way Julian's eyes lingered on him, warm and searching, made him wonder if he needed to. One night, as rain battered the bar's windows, Julian stayed after closing. They sat at a corner table, the neon glow of the jukebox casting shadows across their faces. "Why'd you save me?" Julian asked, his voice soft but piercing. Elliot froze, the question cutting deeper than he expected. "I don't know," he admitted. "I just couldn't let you die." Julian reached across the table, his fingers brushing Elliot's. The touch was electric, and Elliot's breath caught. He didn't pull away. Their connection grew, tentative but undeniable. A stolen glance here, a lingering touch there. One evening, they walked along the pier, the city's skyline glittering across the bay. Julian stopped, turning to face Elliot, his expression raw. "You make me want to be better," he said, voice barely above a whisper. Before Elliot could respond, Julian leaned in, their lips meeting in a kiss that felt like a confession. The world fell away, the mafia, the danger, the secrets. For that moment, it was just them. But the shadows were never far. Elliot started noticing things. A black SUV parked outside the bar too often. Whispered conversations Julian had on his phone when he thought Elliot wasn't listening. One night, Elliot overheard a name, Agent Callahan. It didn't click until later, when he found a burner phone tucked under Julian's jacket, its screen lighting up with a text. "Target acquired. Kane's clean, but keep him close." Elliot's stomach dropped. Who was Julian, really? And why did it feel like the man he was falling for was hiding a blade behind his smile? The burner phone screen burned into Elliot's mind as he stood frozen in his apartment, Julian's jacket still in his hands. Target acquired. The words twisted like a knife, each one carving out the trust he'd built with Julian over weeks of late-night talks and stolen kisses. He wanted to confront him, to demand answers, but Julian was in the shower, the sound of water masking the storm in Elliot's chest. He shoved the phone back under the jacket, his hands shaking. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe Julian was caught up in something bigger, something he couldn't control. But the name, Agent Callahan, gnawed at him. It wasn't a mafia name. It sounded official, like law enforcement. Elliot's life had been messy, but he'd never tangled with cops or feds. So why was Julian, the man who'd kissed him under the stars, hiding a phone with messages about a target? When Julian emerged, towel around his waist, his hazel eyes softened at the sight of Elliot. "You okay?" he asked, stepping closer. Elliot forced a smile, his heart racing. "Yeah, just tired," he lied, turning away to hide the doubt in his eyes. He couldn't confront him, not yet, not until he knew more. The next day, Elliot took a risk. While Julian was out running errands, Elliot rifled through his bag, guilt clawing at him with every move. He found nothing, no ID, no papers, just a pack of gum and a folded map of the city with the docks circled in red. The docks, Lorenzo's territory. Elliot's gut churned. Was Julian working for Lorenzo after all? Or was he playing a different game? That night at the Rusty Anchor, the bar was packed, the air thick with cigarette smoke and laughter. Elliot poured drinks on autopilot, his eyes darting to Julian, who sat at the bar nursing a beer. He looked too calm, too composed, like a man who knew exactly what he was doing. When their eyes met, Julian's smile was warm, but Elliot couldn't shake the feeling that it was a mask. "Hey," Julian said, leaning closer over the counter. "You've been quiet. Something up?" His voice was gentle, but Elliot caught the edge in it, like he was testing the waters. Elliot shrugged, wiping down the bar. "Just life, you know?" He hated how easily the lie came. He hated how much he still wanted to believe in Julian. After closing, they walked to the beach, the same one where they'd kissed weeks ago. The moon hung low, casting silver across the waves. Julian stopped, pulling Elliot close. "I don't know what I'd do without you," he murmured, his breath warm against Elliot's cheek. For a moment, Elliot melted into the embrace, the pull of Julian's touch drowning out his doubts. But then he saw it, a flicker of movement in the shadows. A man in a dark coat watching them from the boardwalk. "Julian," Elliot whispered, his voice tight. "Someone's following us." Julian's body tensed, but he didn't turn. "You're imagining things," he said. Too quickly, Elliot pulled back, searching his face. "Don't lie to me," he said, his voice low but sharp. "Who are you, really?" Julian's expression faltered, a crack in his carefully crafted facade. Before he could answer, tires screeched nearby, and the black SUV Elliot had seen before roared into view. Two men jumped out, guns drawn. "Hart!" one shouted. "You're done." Elliot's instincts kicked in. He grabbed Julian's arm, yanking him behind a dune as bullets sprayed the sand. They ran, hearts pounding, weaving through the dark streets until they reached a safe house Julian seemed to know too well. Inside, Julian locked the door, his hands shaking. "I owe you the truth," he said, his voice raw. "I'm not who you think I am." Elliot's chest tightened. "Then who the hell are you?" he demanded. Julian took a deep breath. "I'm an undercover agent. FBI. My real name's Julian Navarro. I was sent to infiltrate Lorenzo's operation." He paused, his eyes locking onto Elliot's. "And you were never supposed to be part of this." The words hit like a punch. Elliot stumbled back, his mind reeling. An agent. Not a victim, not a lover, just a man playing a role. "So what am I?" Elliot asked, his voice breaking. "Collateral damage?" "No," Julian said, stepping closer, his voice urgent. "You're the only real thing in this mess. I didn't plan to feel this way, Elliot. I swear." He reached out, but Elliot flinched, the burner phone's message flashing in his mind. "Keep him close." "Was any of it real?" Elliot asked, his throat tight. Julian's silence was answer enough. But before they could unravel further, the door rattled. A heavy knock, followed by a voice. "Navarro, open up. It's Callahan." Elliot's blood ran cold. Agent Callahan. The name from the phone. Julian's handler or something worse. As Julian moved to open the door, Elliot grabbed his wrist. "Don't," he whispered. "I don't trust this." For the first time, Julian looked scared. Not of the men outside, but of losing Elliot. "Trust me," he said, his voice pleading. But could he? The safe house was a claustrophobic box, its peeling wallpaper and flickering bulb amplifying the tension between Elliot and Julian. The knock came again, louder, more insistent. "Navarro now." Callahan's voice was a growl, laced with authority. Elliot's grip on Julian's wrist tightened, his eyes boring into Julian's. "If you open that door," Elliot whispered, "you'd better be ready to explain everything." Julian's jaw clenched, conflict flickering across his face. "I will," he said, his voice low but firm. "But we can't stay here. They'll break in." He gently pried Elliot's hand off, his touch lingering as if to reassure him. Elliot didn't know if he believed it, but he stepped back, his heart a war zone of trust and betrayal. Julian opened the door, revealing a man in his 40s, broad-shouldered, with a buzz cut and a face like weathered stone. Agent Callahan's eyes swept the room, landing on Elliot with a cold appraisal. "This the guy?" he asked Julian, as if Elliot were a stray dog. Julian nodded, his expression unreadable. "Elliot Kane. He's involved." "Involved?" Callahan snorted, stepping inside and shutting the door. "He's a liability, Navarro. You were supposed to keep civilians out of this." His tone was sharp, but there was something else, something calculating in the way he watched Elliot. It made Elliot's skin crawl. "I didn't ask to be here," Elliot snapped, his voice cutting through the tension. "I saved his ass from Lorenzo's goons. Maybe you should thank me instead of acting like I'm the problem." Callahan's eyes narrowed, but a faint smirk tugged at his lips, like he was sizing Elliot up and finding him lacking. Julian stepped between them. "Enough, Callahan. What's the situation?" His voice was all business now, the warmth he'd shown Elliot replaced by a steely focus. Callahan tossed a file onto the table, papers spilling out. Photos of Lorenzo's men, maps, and a grainy image of Elliot pouring drinks at the Rusty Anchor. Elliot's stomach lurched. They'd been watching him. "Lorenzo's tightening the net," Callahan said. "He knows someone's leaking intel. He's got eyes everywhere. And now he's got a name, yours, Navarro. And thanks to your little hero act." He jerked his head toward Elliot. "He's got Kane's too." Elliot's blood ran cold. He'd saved Julian, but in doing so, he'd painted a target on his own back. Julian's face paled, but he didn't look at Elliot. "What's the play?" he asked Callahan. "Extraction. Tonight, we pull you out, regroup, and hit Lorenzo's operation hard." Callahan's eyes flicked to Elliot. "He stays behind. Too risky." "No," Julian said, his voice sharp. "He's coming with us." Elliot's heart skipped, caught between relief and suspicion. Was Julian protecting him or keeping him close for some other reason? Callahan scoffed. "You're compromised, Navarro. You're thinking with your heart, not your head." The words stung, and Elliot's gaze snapped to Julian, searching for the truth. Julian didn't deny it. Instead, he turned to Elliot, his eyes pleading. "I won't leave you," he said softly. "Not after everything." Elliot wanted to believe him, but the burner phone's message, "Target acquired," echoed in his mind. He nodded, swallowing his doubts. "Fine, but I'm not some pawn in your game." The extraction was a blur of adrenaline and danger. They piled into a nondescript van, Callahan driving, Julian in the back with Elliot. The city lights streaked past as they sped toward a safe house across the bay. Elliot's mind raced, piecing together fragments of Julian's story. An FBI agent, undercover, risking everything to take down Lorenzo. But why the secrecy? Why the lies? And why did Elliot still feel that pull toward him, even now? At the new safe house, a rundown cabin in Marin County, Callahan laid out the plan. Julian would go deeper, posing as a traitor to lure Lorenzo into a trap. Elliot would stay hidden, a ghost in their operation. But the more Callahan talked, the more Elliot noticed the cracks. Julian's tense shoulders, the way he avoided Callahan's gaze. Something was off. That night, alone in the cabin's cramped bedroom, Elliot confronted him. "What aren't you telling me?" he demanded, his voice low to avoid waking Callahan. Julian sighed, running a hand through his hair. "There's a mole," he admitted. "Someone in the FBI is feeding Lorenzo intel. I don't know who, but it's why I've been careful." Why I didn't tell you everything. Elliot's chest tightened. So you used me, kept me close to cover your tracks. The accusation hung heavy, and Julian flinched. No, he said, stepping closer. I kept you close because I care about you. More than I should. He reached for Elliot's hand, but Elliot pulled back, his heart warring with his head. Then prove it, Elliot said, his voice breaking. No more lies. Julian nodded, his eyes raw with emotion. For a moment, they stood there, the weight of their choices pressing down. Then Julian leaned in, kissing Elliot with a desperation that felt like a promise. And despite everything, Elliot kissed him back. The cabin's wooden walls creaked under the weight of the wind, mirroring the unease in Elliot's chest as he lay beside Julian in the dark. Their kiss had been a fleeting anchor, but doubt still gnawed at him. Julian's confession about the mole had cracked open a new layer of fear, not just of Lorenzo, but of the man he'd risked everything for. Was Julian's touch a lifeline or a trap? Morning brought no clarity. Callahan was already up, barking orders over a burner phone. We move tonight, he told Julian, barely glancing at Elliot. Lorenzo's meeting his supplier at the docks. You'll go in, offer him the intel he wants, and we'll take him down. Julian nodded, his face a mask of resolve, but Elliot caught the flicker of hesitation in his eyes. As Callahan stepped outside to check the perimeter, Elliot pulled Julian aside. This feels wrong, he whispered. If there's a mole, how do you know this isn't a setup? Julian's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer right away. I don't, he admitted finally. But I trust Callahan. He's been my handler for years. Trust? Elliot scoffed, his voice low but sharp. You didn't trust me enough to tell me who you were. Julian's eyes softened, guilt flashing across his face. I was protecting you, he said. The less you knew, the safer you were. Elliot wanted to argue, but the memory of Julian's kiss, the raw need in it, kept him silent. Instead, he asked, What's the intel you're giving Lorenzo? Julian hesitated, then pulled a flash drive from his pocket. Fake shipping manifests, he said. Enough to make Lorenzo think he's got the upper hand. It'll draw him out. The plan sounded solid, but Elliot's gut screamed otherwise. That afternoon, while Julian and Callahan prepped, Elliot slipped outside, pretending to need air. He'd noticed Callahan's laptop left open on the kitchen table, its screen glowing with emails. Heart pounding, he scrolled through them, searching for anything to confirm his suspicions. One subject line caught his eye, Kane's involvement. The email was brief. Neutralize if he becomes a problem. Navarro's too attached. It was signed with a single initial, C. Elliot's blood ran cold. Callahan. The mole was Callahan. He was setting Julian up, and Elliot was collateral damage. He snapped a photo of the email with his phone, his hands shaking. He had to warn Julian. But how? If Callahan suspected he knew, they were both dead. That night, the docks were a maze of cranes and shadows, the air thick with salt and diesel. Julian, wired with a hidden mic, approached Lorenzo's men under the guise of betrayal. Elliot watched from a distance, hidden behind a stack of crates, his heart in his throat. Callahan was nearby, monitoring from a van, his voice crackling through Julian's earpiece. Stick to the script, Navarro, he said. Elliot's fingers curled around the phone in his pocket, the photo of the email burning a hole in his mind. Lorenzo appeared, flanked by his goons, his scar glinting under the dock lights. You've got balls, Hart, he said, using Julian's cover name. What's the deal? Julian handed over the flash drive, his voice steady as he spun the lie. But Elliot saw the shift, a flicker of movement in the shadows. More men, armed, closing in. It was a trap. "Julian, get out!" Elliot shouted, breaking cover. Gunfire erupted, and chaos swallowed the docks. Julian dove behind a crate, pulling Elliot with him as bullets sparked against metal. "What the hell are you doing?" Julian hissed, his eyes wide with fear and fury. "Callahan's the mole," Elliot gasped, shoving his phone at Julian. The email's glow illuminated Julian's face, and for a moment, betrayal cut deeper than the gunfire. "He's going to kill us both." Julian's expression hardened, and he nodded, yanking the earpiece out and crushing it under his boot. They ran, weaving through the docks as Lorenzo's men and Callahan's betrayal closed in. Julian fired back, his aim precise, but they were outnumbered. In a desperate move, they ducked into an abandoned warehouse, barricading the door. Julian's hands were steady, but his eyes were wild. "I didn't know," he said, his voice breaking. "I trusted him." Elliot grabbed his shoulders. "Trust me now," he said, his voice fierce. "We get out of this together." Julian nodded, and in that moment, something shifted. A bond forged in the fire of betrayal. They weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for each other. The warehouse was a tomb of rust and echoes, the air thick with the tang of oil and fear. Elliot and Julian crouched behind a stack of crates, the splintered wood digging into their backs as Lorenzo's men pounded on the barricaded door. Each thud was a countdown, and Elliot's pulse raced in time with it. Julian's hand found his, their fingers interlocking, a silent vow amidst the chaos. "We need a way out," Elliot whispered, his voice steady despite the panic clawing at his chest. Julian's eyes scanned the warehouse, landing on a rusted fire escape ladder in the corner. "There," he said, pointing. But before they could move, the door buckled, and Lorenzo's voice cut through the din. "Navarro, you can't run forever." Julian's grip tightened. "When we get out of this," he said, his voice low and urgent, "I'm telling you everything. No more secrets." Elliot nodded, his throat tight. He wanted to believe it, wanted to hold onto the man who'd kissed him like the world was ending. But first, they had to survive. They sprinted for the ladder, bullets grazing the air. Julian climbed first, pulling Elliot up as the door finally gave way. Lorenzo's men flooded in, but the ladder held, and they scrambled onto the roof, the city sprawling below like a map of their mistakes. The night was alive with sirens, a sign the FBI, or Callahan's backup, was closing in. "We can't trust anyone," Elliot said, his breath ragged. Julian nodded, his face grim. "There's a safe house in Oakland, off the grid. If we can get there, we can disappear." It was a long shot, but it was all they had. They slid down a drainage pipe, hitting the ground running, the docks a blur of shadows and danger. A car screeched nearby, Callahan's van. He'd found them. "Navarro!" Callahan's voice boomed as he stepped out, gun raised. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." His eyes flicked to Elliot, cold and calculating. "And you should have stayed out of it." Julian stepped in front of Elliot, his own gun drawn. "You sold us out," he spat. "How much did Lorenzo pay you?" Callahan's smirk was all the confirmation they needed. "More than the FBI ever did," he said. "Drop the gun, Navarro. Let's end this clean." But Julian didn't back down. "Elliot, run," he whispered, his voice steady. Elliot froze, torn between fear and loyalty. "Not without you," he said, his voice breaking. Julian's eyes softened, and for a moment, it was just them. Two men caught in a storm they hadn't chosen. The standoff shattered as Lorenzo's men caught up, forcing a three-way firefight. Julian and Elliot dove for cover, bullets tearing through the night. In the chaos, Elliot spotted a fuel drum near Callahan's van. "Julian!" he shouted, pointing. Julian understood instantly, firing a shot that sparked the drum. The explosion lit up the docks, sending Callahan and Lorenzo's men scrambling. They ran, stealing a motorcycle from the edge of the lot and speeding toward Oakland. The safe house was a rundown apartment, bare but secure. Inside, they collapsed, breathless, their bodies pressed close. "We made it," Elliot said, disbelief coloring his voice. Julian cupped his face, his touch gentle but fierce. "Because of you," he said. "You saved me. Again." The truth came slowly, in the quiet of the safe house. Julian admitted he'd been assigned to monitor Elliot, suspected of ties to Lorenzo's network through the bar. But the more he watched, the more he saw Elliot's heart, his loyalty, his courage. "I fell for you," Julian confessed, his voice raw, "and it terrified me." Elliot listened, his anger softening into something deeper. "You should have told me," he said, but there was no venom in it. He leaned in, their foreheads touching. "But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." Days later, they turned the tables. Using the photo of Callahan's email, they tipped off the FBI's internal affairs, exposing the mole. Lorenzo's empire crumbled in the fallout, his men arrested, his power broken. Callahan was taken down, his betrayal laid bare. Julian quit the FBI, choosing a life where he could be himself. Not an agent, not a liar, but a man who loved Elliot. They rebuilt slowly together in a small house by the sea. The scars remained: doubt, fear, the weight of what they'd survived. But so did their love, fierce and unshakable. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Elliot carved their initials into a piece of driftwood, a quiet promise of forever. They'd saved each other, not just from Mafia bosses or rogue agents, but from the parts of themselves they'd feared to face. And in that, they found their meaning.